You're listening to Civic from the San Francisco Public Press. On this edition, we'll learn why civil rights advocates have filed a class action lawsuit against a Bay Area city over a parking ordinance.
If you look at the legislative history of these measures, the intent has always been to ban RVs from the city. And, of course, we voiced our concerns about the constitutionality of that measure, eventually settled on this combination of two ordinances which ban RV parking on narrow streets and bike lanes. But throughout those city council meetings and that kind of public debate, the city is expressing concerns more so about where RVs are parking in terms of their visibility to the public, and less so about actual traffic safety concerns.
I'm Laura Wennis, and this is Civic. The city of Mountain View is installing thousands of no parking signs intended to keep oversized vehicles from parking on narrow streets. The restrictions are for streets that are 40 feet wide or less, and it's therefore referred to as a narrow streets ordinance. That metric means more than 80% of the city's streets qualify. According to reporting from the local paper, the Mountain View Voice, advocates on both sides of this measure openly acknowledged that it was actually a means to reduce the growing number of homeless people living in their vehicles. On July 14th, a group of civil rights organizations and disability advocates filed a suit against the city over that ordinance, describing it as unconstitutional. To put this ordinance into context and understand what exactly the lawsuit is about, I talked with Michael Trujillo, a staff attorney in the housing program at the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley, which is one of the organizations bringing the suit. And with Yesica Prado, a photojournalist who has documented the lives of vehicle dwellers for the San Francisco Public Press and who herself lives in her RV. So let's catch everyone up on how we got here. Mountain View went to the voters, I believe, last November with a proposal to ban the parking of oversized vehicles. This was called Measure C, and 57% of Mountain View voters approved it, so it became law, and the process of installing no parking signage began, I think, this year. Michael, am I missing any key details in that description?
Actually, I do think it's important to note that it wasn't City Council that put the measure to the voters, but rather City Council passed the measure, and then a group of concerned citizens actually organized and mobilized to sign a referendum petition and actually hold up the measure from taking effect to have a chance for voters to weigh in.
And why did that happen? Why did they want to take it to the voters after the City Council had passed this ordinance?
Well, there's, I think, a committed group of citizens and vehicle residents in Mountain View that are, very concerned about just the impact that this measure would have on folks who are relying on RVs for shelter in the city of Mountain View. And so, that group mobilized very quickly, got a lot of signatures, and, put it to the referendum to really try to hold up the actual enforcement of this measure, because the reality is that once it takes effect, people are going to be pushed out of the city.
Mm-hmm. I want to get Yessi's insight here because, Yessi, you've documented vehicle dwellers' lives extensively, and of course you live in an RV yourself. Can you put the Mountain View RV ban into context? Like, do other municipalities also have similar bans, or what's happened when other places tried to ban RV living?
There's a lot of other Bay Area cities that have banned oversized parking. And, the first vehicles that are targeted are people living in RVs. And actually this ordinance was a lot of these ordinances were actually crafted to target commercial vehicles from parking in their cities. But now you're seeing a new way of them being used, now there's targeting people that are living in their vehicles. So I would say of course there's San Francisco that had their oversized vehicle ordinance back in 2013, and it's still in effect, although they don't enforce it in all the streets, but that's when they passed their ordinance. Berkeley also passed an oversized vehicle ordinance back in 2019, and then also Pacifica also passed one. So you see cities throughout the Bay Area kind of doing the same thing, and then when they pass these ordinances, they basically are just eliminating all the parking spots where people can park. So it's every city does that. Where does that leave residents? And this is why, people are basically fighting for their parking spot, because this is really the only place where they can be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people live in RVs that aren't fully functional or even mobile. Can you talk about how that affects people's ability to comply with a ban like this?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's really hard when your vehicle doesn't work. I mean, for instance, just having to move it for the 72-hour rules is really difficult. So, you having to go find a parking spot when basically all the streets have been, limited for you not to park on them. So it's just really difficult. So like basically there's not a lot of tows that could actually tow an RV. So that's kind of limited, and they're also costly if they wanted to do that, if they wanted to move their vehicle out of the way. AAA only gives you 3 tows a year. So most of the time they're already used up by the time they really need to move. So 3 tows is not enough for them to keep them moving to comply with this ordinance. So yeah, it's really difficult. And at the end of the day, people can move and then they lose their vehicle. It shouldn't go that way, but that's basically how the cities are enforcing this ordinance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so several civil rights groups have now come together and filed this class action lawsuit on behalf of vehicle dwellers against the city over this ban. And the organizations bringing this suit are the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley, disability rights activists, and disability rights advocates, and the ACLU Foundation of Northern California, as well as King and Spalding LLP. And the plaintiffs basically claim that the ban is unconstitutional, inhumane, and disproportionately impacts people with disabilities, which is in violation of federal and state law. Michael, could you unpack that a bit?
Silicon Valley is the highest income region in the world, but that wealth really hasn't been shared, and the income inequality and the worsening housing crisis have required people to find alternative ways to stay housed and to be sheltered, particularly during the COVID pandemic. Many of those folks have turned to RVs to do that, and RVs provide a considerable amount of safety and security over living on the street. Unfortunately, the city of Mountain View has passed 2 measures that it's a narrow streets ordinance and a bike lane ordinance that together basically prohibit RV parking throughout the city. And as Yesi mentioned, the threat of enforcement of those measures, which could include ticketing and towing of the vehicle, which often includes everything that somebody owns, is really an unacceptable risk for RV residents. And so that threat we see as a unconstitutional and inhumane attempt to really push people out of the community of their choice and often the community that they grew up in and have family and support networks in as well.
And can you talk about how this disproportionately affects people with disabilities? I mean, I think that homelessness in general disproportionately affects people with disabilities and people of color, but is that specifically what's meant in the lawsuit?
Right. So you're right that in the Bay Area, and particularly in Santa Clara County, folks with disabilities are hugely overrepresented in our unhoused population. And so we know that just by the numbers, this is going to disproportionately impact people with disabilities. But the actual, effect of losing one's only source of shelter and losing a social source of shelter that can be parked in the location of one's choosing, I think has a unique impact on folks with disabilities. Plaintiffs and other vehicle residents we're working with have to remain in Mountain View to actually stay close to medical providers, some of them within a walking distance. And that can be a matter of life and death for folks who have severe conditions.
And just for a non-lawyer like me, what is specifically unconstitutional about a ban like this? It sounds like it's pretty clear that it's very dangerous for people to lose all of their belongings and their shelter in one go if they're towed, but how is it unconstitutional?
We're really concerned that this is going to restrict people's right to free movement and right to travel. We're also concerned about the impact that this will have on just folks' kind of substantive safety. And so we think it's unconstitutional for the state to, affirmatively place people in a situation of greater danger than they would be otherwise. We're also highly concerned about the impact that towing would have on folks and see that as an unconstitutional seizure of property as well as an excessive fine and fee.
I want to check with Yesi if you have any questions for Michael about the lawsuit.
So basically, I wanted just to add a few things what he said. That he mentioned that how it will like affect disproportionately like people with disabilities. I think that is like 100% true because I mean a lot of those people live on a fixed income. So basically, the only form of living that they have now is their vehicle. So I have definitely met a lot of people with disabilities in their vehicles, and also families. You know, like families really need a bigger vehicle to live together, right? So I see a lot of the recreational vehicles have families in there, and they also need to stay close to school, close to their job. So I feel like it's just really going to greatly affect people that are just trying to hold it together, right? And also, in addition to what he was saying, that being unconstitutional, I mean, basically, we are taking away people's belongings just for a couple of $100. I mean, if the fees that they owe is just basically registration, which is probably like, you know, $150, $300, depending on how many years back it is. So I feel like, you know, or like just like for parking in the where they used to always park, and now there's a sign that says that they can't park there. So obviously, like losing their property for something as a few $100 is not the way to actually, you know, solve this issue. So some questions that I did have for Michael. Yeah, what are basically the next steps for people to do? Like right now, if like they're already putting up the parking signs. They bought the parking signs and they're gonna put them in the city. So what's the next steps for the residents while the lawsuit is in process?
I should say we're hopeful that the city will work with us and then actually find alternative solutions. But you know, we are prepared to seek injunctive relief if to prevent the ban from being enforced if that's necessary. And
what's injunctive relief?
So injunctive relief would be an order from the court, basically prohibiting the RV ban from being enforced.
Mm-hmm. How would residents of a vehicle go about getting that?
So because our lawsuit is a class action, that order would apply to everyone in the city. You know, as far as what individual residents can do, I think that's a really difficult question. And the city of Mountain View isn't providing folks many answers beyond applying for their safe parking program, which is only a temporary solution and, you know, has program rules that make it infeasible for some folks to enter. And so it's not really clear, I think, you know, how the city is expecting our RV residents to respond to this action or you know, what opportunity folks will have to stay in the city if the RV ban starts to get enforced.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the city is not telling people where they actually can park. They're just threatening that the signs are going up, enforcement's going to start, and that's creating a lot of confusion, I think fear among vehicle residents in the community.
But yeah, it just causes fear, and it's just like confusion, right? Because you don't know when they're coming for you. And that's really disheartening, you know, like nobody should have to live that way day to day, thinking if like your time is up, you know, and then you have to figure out another solution. I mean, this is a solution for people already. Instead of living in tents, like if their vehicle provides the necessary means for you to be able to, you know, just live your life. But I think the difficult part is just like, because they're so big, like it's just, it always comes down to like them being seen as vehicles instead of people. So I just hope that something about that can change. That we need policy that addresses the people, not the vehicles, because otherwise we're just gonna go back to the same problem. You know, there's just gonna be more vehicles. Because I have seen more people purchase RVs during the pandemic. I mean, people have lost their homes during the pandemic. So, you know, it's only a matter of time that we see more vehicles on the streets.
Michael, can you clarify what you mean by the city doesn't let people know where they're going to enforce? I might have not understood that correctly, but if there are signs up, is that the notice that they're giving, or are the signs not up yet, or do they just like come through and enforce, you know, some random morning? How does this work? How do people not know?
What I meant to say is that the city is not telling people where they can go or where they can be free from enforcement.
I see.
And without those options, that's what, you know, creates a confusion.
As I understand it, one of the arguments against the ban is that the city of Mountain View needs to provide an alternative, basically. So affordable housing options for all RV dwellers if it wants to ban RV parking as shelter. Would emergency shelters satisfy that requirement, or would you say it has to be affordable, you know, permanent affordable housing only?
Right, that's a great question. We really don't see how interim or temporary housing solutions actually solve the problem. I think, as Yessi pointed out, we need to actually, provide for folks who are living in vehicles by offering permanent housing. I'll also point out that it's not clear that people would actually be able to keep their vehicular homes or any of their possessions if they try to access some of these temporary solutions. And that's a big problem for us as well. That's an additional disruption and harm to folks that shouldn't be necessary for them just to get a roof over their heads.
You're saying people would lose their belongings if they went to a shelter?
It's not clear to us that they would be able to keep their their RVs and belongings if they chose to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, Yessi, did you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, basically, I wouldn't see a person living in an RV living in a shelter, to be honest, because, the vehicle is already their own private home, right? Instead of being out in the open in a shelter, in a communal space with people that you might not know. So people would prefer to stay even in a broken down RV than to be in a shelter. And I feel like what we need to actually provide to people is not like a shelter space, but we need to provide like a center where we can actually repair vehicles so people are not out on the streets in disrepair and, having to cause more problems because, maybe their tanks are leaking or they have problems with electricity. So I feel like all these problems are overspilling to the neighboring communities because we don't want to address them. We don't want to provide like a place where they can actually fix their vehicles. And I feel like that would actually solve a lot of the problems that we have on the street, just being able to fix the vehicles that are out there. So that's what I would like them to see offer, because I feel like that's a more viable solution to be able to take care of now than to actually find permanent housing for all those people. Because right now we're trying to still find permanent housing for our neighbors also living in tents. So imagine we're just kind of like trying to find housing for everybody. But like right now, what we need to really do is just help the people that already have some kind of shelter and just help them make it better.
Let's hear more from attorney Michael Trujillo and photojournalist Yesica Prado about RV bans and why a group of advocates is suing a Bay Area city over one of them. Mountain View has something called safe parking sites, and this is an approach that a couple different cities have taken, and it's basically where you allow people to stay in their RVs in certain areas, like certain parking lots, so long as they adhere to certain rules too, usually. And Mountain View, according to its website, has 5 active lots in this program, which makes it the largest safe parking capacity in the county. But I think that's only around 100 parking spots, and there are just more vehicle dwellers than safe parking spots. Michael, does the city providing these parking spots factor into, the alternatives that are available and your considerations in the suit?
It's important to point out that even with those lots, the need for the number of people living in RVs in the city of Mountain View vastly exceeds the spaces available. So not all of those spaces that you mentioned can actually accommodate oversized vehicles.
That's a good point.
Some are just for passenger cars. So essentially, it's just 2 lots within the city that can actually accommodate oversized vehicles.
Thank you for clarifying that.
I think that this really gets back to the idea that people need the freedom to actually park in particular locations. For example, to be close to a medical office, or family or source of support, and or they just need the freedom to move about the city in the way that they would like to. And having to only park in 2 parking lots within the city doesn't provide people the freedom to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And do you happen to know roughly what the ratio is? Like by how much does the number of people who live in RVs exceed the available parking spots? Is it like twice as many, 3 times, 10 times?
I think it's close to 3 times, but the city's last count of oversized vehicles, they do an on-street count where they try to estimate how many vehicles are in the city, oversized vehicles are in the city being occupied. There were over 190 oversized vehicles being lived in. I think the current number of spaces for oversized vehicle parking and safe parking is only about 60 or so spaces, 60 to 70 spaces. So, it's about 3 times the actual capacity.
Yeah, Yessie, I think that you've done quite a bit of reporting on safe parking spaces or like RV parking spaces provided by the city. What is your take on that proportion issue and on what those safe parking spaces provide and don't provide?
Yeah. Well, I feel like the safe parking spaces definitely provide a place for people to be at night and feel safe, right? A lot of people, especially people that are like living on their own in their vehicles, they need such place to be able to feel safe, to be able to know there's other people that are in their vehicles that are also watching out for them. So I think that really helps out that population that really do need, security. But also, I mean, the safe parking places, that's all it does. It just provides you a place to sleep at night. Some of the programs are connected to housing, but even the housing takes a while. I mean, you can have a full parking lot and maybe just only house 2 or 3 RVs. So I just feel like those parking spaces need to provide more. Like I said, they should be repairing vehicle repairs. They should be offering other services that could actually help the person be better in their life, other than just like a parking space. But you do see them popping out all over the Bay Area. Oakland has one. San Francisco just closed theirs in the summer. So now they don't have a vehicle parking programs. So, and also Berkeley, they're about to open one in September. But basically, cities also use these programs as a way to also enforce their ordinances. So, for example, when Berkeley opens up their parking lot the safe parking lot in September, they're going to start enforcing the overnight ban, which they had set in place in 2019, and now it's going to be in effect, right? So some of those parking programs kind of have, other consequences for the people that don't make it into those spaces. So, I feel like they do provide a good source for those that can actually be in there. But for the rest, it just becomes a way for the city to enforce them and to enforce the ordinances and basically just try to get them out of their city.
What can either of you say about the rules that are in place for the alternatives to parking on the street? I mean, like safe parking, for example. It seems like the alternatives at this point are safe parking site or go to a different city that doesn't currently have a ban in place. What does that entail? Like, do you have to follow strict rules for going to a safe parking site? Are there different rules you have to pay attention to if you go to a different city? How does this work?
Yeah, no, there are specific rules. So for one, you have to be part of the coordinated entry system. So if you're not in the city's coordinated entry system, you can't get in there, You cannot just
This is for San Francisco or for other cities too?
For other cities too, you have to be in their homeless system so that they can actually see that you have been assessed, you do have a need for housing, and this is a program for you. People basically have to go through that bureaucracy first before they can even actually go into the parking program. It's not like a pull in, you pull in and then you're in. This doesn't work that way. So that's why it leaves a lot of people out on the streets. So you do have to be part of the system. And then you also, some of the spaces also tell you that you can't have guests, you can't cook outside. They also don't have showers daily. They only have showers maybe twice a week. And then also you can use electricity. So for example, like extension cords, like out into the parking lot, you have to be able to provide your own electricity. So it's different parking lots have different rules. And then I feel like not all vehicle residents can actually, fulfill them because everybody's in a different state of disrepair, in their vehicle especially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Michael, did you want to add to that? What do vehicle dwellers have to do in order to comply with a ban of this kind at the moment?
I think Yessie really captured it well, and I will just say that we've heard from many of the vehicle residents in Mountain View that they've encountered similar obstacles with Mountain View's program.
I want to bring up one thing from the city. A Mountain View city spokesperson told KPIX that Measure C, so this ban, is about traffic safety, and they wrote that because of their size, vehicles like RVs on narrow streets can encroach into the driving lane and increase the risk of collisions, both for cars and for bikes. I want to get both of your takes on this, but maybe let's start with Yessie here to talk about to what degree collisions are a concern for vehicle dwellers. And Michael, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about the city's concern about traffic collisions.
Yeah, traffic collisions, they're a concern for the people that are living inside those vehicles, because you never know who's going to come and hit you in the middle of the night, or if the person, when they're turning their corner, if they're going to hit you. I have seen that happen many times. So I think the primary concern, it comes from the people living in these vehicles. There is a concern. But I feel like for other people that have to also make use of those streets, I mean, the vehicles are pretty large and they do have like blind spots where you can see what's coming, or if you're turning the corner, you can see what's there. So that does get difficult. But like I said, we should be assigning places where people with these large vehicles can actually park. I mean, for instance, we're assigning places where we can have parklets, right? Parklets are also big. But yeah, we have assigned spaces where you can be outside to enjoy your drink, and we can set aside a space for people to live. So it just feels like our priorities in the cities are wrong. Like we're prioritizing you having a drink instead of, someone's life. So I feel like there is a way for you to actually assign a parking space that can actually accommodate large vehicles. But it's just a matter of actually, putting together a map.
Mm.
But yeah.
Michael, what are your thoughts on that, on the traffic collision concern?
We see this as completely pretextual. If you look at the legislative history of these measures, the intent has always been to ban RVs from the city. And in its original form, when we first got involved with vehicle residents back in March of 2019, the city was proposing a citywide 24-hour oversized vehicle parking ban on all city streets. Then, of course, we voiced our concerns about the constitutionality of that measure. The city came back with an overnight ban, kind of similar to what Berkeley passed, and then eventually settled on this combination of two ordinances which ban RV parking on narrow streets and bike lanes. But throughout those city council meetings and that kind of public debate, the city is expressing concerns more so about where RVs are parking in terms of their visibility to the public, and less so about actual traffic safety concerns. And I think public comments at those city council meetings really reflect that. I'll also just point out that with the narrow streets ordinance in particular, the city didn't even really know which streets it would apply to when it passed it. They had to go out later and measure the streets that would apply to. It actually thought that it would cover more streets than it actually would, than it actually does. There are some portions of the street that are a bit wider than the city expected. And so I think that shows that, the city was not really trying to tailor these measures to their traffic safety concerns, but rather trying to tailor them in a way that would cover all the RVs in the city. And I think, Yesi's comments really point out that RV residents themselves are very sensitive to these safety concerns and take great concern and put great effort into parking in a way that does not obstruct the traffic in any way.
Well, Michael and Yesi, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you talking with me.
Yeah, no, thank you for having us.
Thanks for the opportunity.
That was Michael Trujillo, staff attorney with the Law Foundation of Silicon Valley, and Yesica Prado, a photojournalist. When the suit was first filed, the city of Mountain View put out a statement saying it was evaluating the suit and that it had no comment on the suit beyond that. In terms of the ordinance, the city said it affects all oversized vehicles parked on a narrow street, and that such vehicles can encroach into the vehicle lane of traffic, which can increase the risk of collisions and make it more difficult for emergency vehicles to navigate the street safely. The statement also said that the city would continue to conduct multifaceted outreach and provide information about resources available in Mountain View, including the Safe Parking, Life Moves Mountain View, and other housing programs to assist people living in vehicles. I reached out to a spokesperson for the city of Mountain View to see if there are any updates to that statement and if a city official would like to talk about the ordinance. She says there's no update and the city declined an interview. I'm Laura Wennis, and you've been listening to Civic. Before I let you go today, at the Public Press, which is Civic's parent organization, we've been working really hard during this pandemic to pursue angles we're not seeing much coverage of elsewhere, or to take a more systemic look at the issues that are surfacing in the headlines. The San Francisco Public Press is a nonprofit, and we're inspired by the public radio model. That's the idea that people who are able to support the work that we do so everyone can have access to it without paywalls or ads. If you think we're onto something, we'd very much appreciate if you could show your support. You can do that by going to sfpublicpress.org/donate, or by helping us get the word out about this show. Subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use, or leave us a review. It really does help, so thank you.